This is the Ypres salient in Belgium. 90 years ago, during World War I, it was one of the most dangerous places on the planet. More than 1 million men were killed or wounded within a few kilometres of this spot. In the open, even in the trenches, death was no more than a sniper's bullet or an artillery shell away, which was why most of the hundreds of thousands of Allied troops who served here spent as much time as they possibly could underground. They lived in dugouts, extensive underground bunkers with room to eat, sleep, and escape the terrors of the war above. But although thousands were built along the Western Front, we know next to nothing about them, the men who built them, or life underground. Now, though, in this Belgian cornfield, a team of archaeologists think they've found a dugout untouched since the end of the war, and they're planning to excavate it. If the team are right, then this shaft, which plunges over 40 feet into the Belgian mud, is the gateway to an extraordinary underground world. Down here, there should be a whole complex of rooms. Kitchens, sleeping quarters, an ops room, officers' mess, home and security for 50 people. Exploring this underground world will be fraught with danger.
Shit!
What is it?
That's your worst nightmare, an underground fire.
Clear out the smoke.
But it could also reveal for the first time the secrets of a forgotten but brutal theatre of combat. Deep underground.
It was a secret war, a clandestine war, a barbaric war.
And the excavation could also rescue from anonymity the extraordinary and secretive corps of elite tunnellers who waged the underground war, including these men, some of the Royal Engineers who actually built the bunker. A team led by military historian Peter Barton and battlefield archaeologist Tony Pollard have come to Flanders to hunt for vampire. This is the name the British gave to one of the last dugouts built during the First World War.
Vampire Farm's probably the coolest name on the Western Front, and it's called Vampire because the Allies gave it each sector a designating letter, and this is V sector. So all the names in here begin with V, don't they? What are the others?
Vanguard, Vamoose, Vanquish, that kind of thing, yeah.
Vampire is definitely the best.
Vampire's a good name for a dugout, yeah.
So if we were going to try and get inside...
According to the few traces of it in the official records, Vampire was a brigade headquarters, and it lies somewhere under this field. About halfway between Ypres and Passchendaele in Belgium.
We know very little, really, about Vampire, but we don't have any eyewitness accounts from the men that lived in it or built it. It's to me, a bit of a conundrum, and my challenge, I think, is to try and tease more information out of this story.
Not surprisingly, the records don't reveal exactly where in the field it was, so the team must find it for themselves. Which is much easier said than done.
You've got your work cut out, Mark, I'm afraid. We want to know how many...
They've got 7 days to track down the bunker. They're using the latest ground-penetrating radar kit to peer 15 metres below the surface. It leads them to all kinds of war debris.
That's the body of the shell. And this would have wrapped around the base of the shell. The shell was full of these iron balls.
These are pretty rare.
When it exploded, they all shot out in all directions.
These are very rare.
Not bad, but not what we're after.
For 6 days, they scour the field, but the team can find no trace of the dugout.
It's extremely frustrating because we've got so much limited time. It's depressing. It's here somewhere. We know it's beneath our feet.
We're still finding things where our machine said there would be things, but they're just not what we're looking for, not the shaft or the entrance to the inclines.
At 5 o'clock on the final day, they've all but given up hope. They excavate one final radar target.
I think we've got it now. I think you're right. But I think we have got it.
We better get a second opinion of Peter.
Peter!
What do you reckon, Pete? It's not a shell hole. Timber there, timber there.
No, that's it. There's no doubt. No doubt.
Sack
no doubt.
full of concrete for some reason.
No doubt. There's the key. I mean, you can find squares of timber everywhere. These are the key. These are the 4 corner posts for holding the roof up.
So we
That's
found
it. That is it. That's it.
Fantastic.
You sure?
Yes, at last I'm sure.
But finding the dugout's only the beginning. Now Peter's got to work out how to excavate a fragile 90-year-old structure 14 metres underground safely. The sequence of events that led to Vampire began in September 1914. The Germans advanced through Belgium towards Paris. The British and French managed to push them back. As the two sides dug in, the Belgian town of Ypres became a key battleground. If the Germans took it, they'd be able to reach the coast and block supply ships from England. Fighting here was bitter, and for 3 years the two armies were locked in bloody stalemate. Then, in July 1917, the Allies launched a huge offensive. They hurled 12 divisions at the German lines in a bid to make a decisive break. Their goal for the first day was the village of Passchendaele, less than 10 kilometres away.
What they wanted to do was to sweep right through here very fast, giving the Germans no time to recover, go way beyond Passchendaele. The idea was simply to break through and finish the war here. That was the whole hope.
But a battle that was planned to last days dragged on for months. Torrential rain transformed the battlefield into a quagmire. The attack got literally stuck in the mud.
When we talk about Passchendaele mud, this is the kind of stuff we're dealing with. That's the liquid mud that we had during the battle. That's what you've got. You fall in, your foot is stuck in it, you cannot move. The more you wriggle, the more you sink. And the orders were given on the advance that you were not allowed to stop if one of your pals fell in. And I've met men who've said you just had to block your ears to their screams, shouting to be saved.
By September of 1917, after more than 2 months fighting, the Allies had advanced little more than halfway to Passchendaele. Tens of thousands of fresh troops were thrown into the fray. Finally, on November the 16th, 1917, at a total cost of 250,000 casualties, the Allies took the village. For more than 2 years, this field was behind enemy lines. But then, during the Allied advance in autumn 1917, the Battle of Passchendaele, it became the scene of some of the fiercest fighting. In one day, the Royal Dublin Fusiliers 2nd Battalion lost roughly half its strength. That's around about 400 men when they were trying to attack that farm. But once the battle was over and the front had moved about 3 kilometres in that direction, this field, muddy, featureless bog that it was, became important for a different reason. Because it was here, just behind the new front line, where the bulk of the British forces had to make a new home and find sanctuary from the probing German artillery.
The British had captured this area, and now they were going to get it in the neck from the German artillery for doing so.
But there was nowhere for them to hide. The Battle of Passchendaele had destroyed every building, every shred of cover.
So it's just utter devastation upon which man could not survive on the surface, and that's precisely why the British had to go underground.
British troops had been living underground in Ypres for nearly 3 years before the Battle of Passchendaele. But now the front line had moved, they had to build more than 150 new dugouts, and they had to build them quickly.
It was bigger than any civil engineering project that had ever been undertaken. There were more men living underground during the war than people who live on the surface now. And they had absolutely no choice.
Situated just behind the new British front line, as it was after the Battle of Passchendaele, Vampire was one of these new dugouts. 90 years after it was built, and 9 months after they discovered it, Peter and the team returned to the cornfield to begin the excavation. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
The plough has groomed away the landscape until you can no longer see what went on. You could hardly believe a battle happened here, but beneath it, that war is still there. Hundreds of thousands of men lived in this. It was an integral part of trench warfare, but we know nothing at all. It's an aspect of the First World War which has been forgotten.
Because it's lain untouched since the end of the war, Peter and the team hope to find the dugout exactly as it was the day the last soldier left it.
The preservation conditions, if somebody was reading a newspaper down there, in theory, that newspaper might still be there.
For 2 years, historian Peter Barton has been scouring documents and the Belgian countryside for a World War I dugout, codename Vampire.
What do you reckon, Pete?
Now he thinks he's found it in a cornfield just outside Ypres.
That's it. That is it. That's it.
Fantastic.
And he and his team of engineers and archaeologists are about to begin the excavation. Here's the border between Belgium and France. Where are we on the big map?
We are at Ypres, or very close to Ypres, the great symbolic centre for the British Army in Belgium.
And is this where we are now?
That's exactly where we are now, that's right. So what the British did in 1917 when they attacked the Battle of Passchendaele is they left these lines here, moved forward, got to there on the 20th of September.
And Passchendaele's over here, so that's where they were trying to get to?
Correct. Yeah.
What is it that we think is here?
Well, we think it's one of a series of dugouts that the British started to construct to basically protect themselves from the shelling. It's a brigade headquarters, which is where a brigadier general would have come to basically lay down the law and what was happening in his sector. We do have generic plans of what one of these things should look like. We don't have any specific to Vampire. This is a kind of general blueprint, and what you've got underground is a long gallery or passage with various rooms coming off. There are 36 bunks in a recess here for the enlisted men, and we've got our commanding officer in his private quarters almost up at the end. Importantly for us, there's also a shaft, and this would have been the first thing that the men dug, and they would dig down 30 or 40 feet and then tunnel out from it.
I'd thought it was going to be like a glorified bomb shelter, but actually this is very elaborate, isn't it?
It's incredible, and the answer to all this effort is really the incredibly poor condition of the ground surface. 40 or 50 centimetres under your foot, it's just a pock-marked lunar landscape, and it's just shell hole after shell hole after shell hole. And this gives you a pretty good idea of what you would expect almost in this field. It's a photograph taken immediately after the war.
It's such a straight, flat horizon, isn't it? There's nothing there at all.
Absolutely.
It's been wiped clean by the shelling, yeah.
You would be scared as hell up here, safe and content.
It's the only place where you could let your shoulders drop underground. You could sit on a bunk with your candle and just think, I'm safe here.
And where do you think the shaft is that over here where this earth is?
That's
in the
one
tent.
of our evaluation trenches. It's in the tent and it's packed full of clay.
It's all fingers crossed, because it's 2.5 years of planning here, and there are no guarantees of anything at all.
Whenever you talk about this, there's a little smile playing across your face. Why?
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why, because you're stepping straight back in time. As we go down that shaft, if we get to the bottom, every metre, we will go back 7 years. And when we get to the bottom, we'll be 90 years. And then we should, hopefully, be able to walk straight into a time capsule.
Peter and his team expect the bunker to be full of water, which they plan simply to pump out. But before they can do that, they have to clear the shaft that leads down to it. which means excavating more than 10 tons of claggy clay from a very confined and dangerous space. This is no ordinary archaeological dig, so Peter has recruited some specialists to help him. Johan van der Waal is a former civilian tunneler. He's been exploring Belgian dugouts since he was 13. Gary Andrews is an engineering contractor and in charge of safety.
Whenever you are, mate, yeah.
The team are under pressure. They've got enough money for just 4 weeks' work, so they need to clear the shaft as quickly as they can.
This is, butterflies at this particular moment. Anyway, what we're going to do is just clear the top of the shaft, reveal it all. What we're doing is reproducing exactly what the tunnellers did in 1918.
In January 1918, just behind the new British front lines, a group of very unusual men began work on the Vampire dugout. They belonged to 171 Tunnelling Company, one of 25 specialist units in the Royal Engineers. The tunnellers operated exclusively underground. They built dugouts for the troops fighting on the surface, and they waged a war of their own, tunnelling beneath German trenches to blow them up. Most were ex-miners and sewer workers, used to life underground. Some were working in British coal mines one week and digging near the front the next. They arrived with little or no military training. Their skills made the tunnellers an elite group. They were paid 3 times as much as regular soldiers and had complete authority over them. They were older too. It wasn't uncommon to find men in their 50s tunnelling in the front line.
Good. That's the top of your shaft. That's the proof we needed. We'll protect that and then carry on with the descent, shall we? Fantastic. Thank you very much, 171 Tunnelling Company.
Although the 171 built dozens of structures like this during the war, very little is known of the tunnellers themselves. The consequences of the Germans finding out where they were operating would have been catastrophic, so their work and their identity were shrouded in secrecy. Photos underground were discouraged, and very few left diaries or letters. So only a handful of images of these extraordinary men remain. Incredibly, one of them is a portrait of some 171 tunnellers. These are the men who built Vampire. We don't yet know any of their names, but what they built here should reveal a lot more about them and their extraordinary role in the war. After a day of excavating the old-fashioned way, Johan suggests a quicker and less exhausting approach. Instead of digging the clay out, he liquefies it with water and pumps out the resulting gloop. The pace of descent is now rapid. But the deeper down the shaft they go, the more nervous the team become.
We are in a dangerous environment. The shortlist is cave-in, tumbling down the shaft, flooding, lack of oxygen, explosives.
When you're down there and you're actually working away, you start to realise what the men did when they first produced this shaft. Working under shell fire, under gunfire, they couldn't wait to get underneath. We actually feel a little bit less safe in the bottom, as we do up here.
While Gary and Johan continue down, Tony Pollard uses more traditional archaeological techniques to explore the area around the mouth of the shaft. He soon recovers a key piece of 171's kit.
That's a plumb bob.
It is the plumb bob.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I've never seen one before either. That's the origin of the shaft.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
That's what would have been used to build this shaft.
A weight on the end of a length of cord hangs vertically downwards. The men of 171 used this simple technology to ensure the walls of their shaft were true.
That'll do.
Next to the plumb bob, though, there's a grim reminder of why dugouts were needed in the first place.
What would happen when that shell hit the surface, it would have a percussion fuse, which meant it burst straight away, and things like this will be flying through the air.
Just feel that, solid steel.
You wouldn't want to be hit by that, would you?
That would cut you clean in two. It's horrific. And this is the sort of stuff that these guys had to live with on a day-to-day basis.
It still is really sharp.
Well, I can't imagine being hit by something like that. That is horrible.
Board on the side and put a mark on it. And actually physically measure it.
Johan's clay blasting strategy is working a treat. And 11 metres down the shaft, Peter begins probing for the bottom.
Just testing again. Yep, that's the floor.
What?
It's just over 6 foot to the floor.
Which is great, but there should also be an entrance to the dugout at the bottom of the shaft. And so far, there's no sign.
Yeah, just can't get it out.
Perhaps this isn't a dugout after all.
Hope it's not a well.
Dugouts are a big problem in this part of Belgium. Most have been forgotten, and homes and roads have been built on them. Now they're collapsing from old age. Some cave in suddenly, causing accidents and even deaths. Some dugouts can even be found beneath cemeteries. Now gravestones are sinking into the past. Back at the shaft, Gary's made a breakthrough.
Is it true?
He's found the entrance to the dugout.
Was that an exciting moment?
Oh! It's awesome!
Yeah?
Yeah, good.
Until you actually do find these things, you never know. I mean, you'll always think, God, is it a well? Is it just a well? But it's not, it's vampire. A very, very exciting moment.
Oh, dear, mate.
Okay, next shift.
Next shift, mate, it's all yours.
While the teams celebrate, I decide it's time to see the shaft for myself. This ladder here is the one that I just climbed down, and over here is the one that Thomas used 90 years ago. And what really smacks you between the eyes when you get to the bottom is the incredible state of preservation about everything here. Look at this black patch. That is candle burn from when this place was originally built. But of course, emptying the shaft is only stage one. Stage two starts down there. The main body of the bunker itself, which is still full of water.
This is from the ground surface, 10.75 from the shaft head.
Okay.
And so it will remain, at least for the next phase of the investigation.
Before we even set foot into the galleries and the tunnels below, we're going to put in a submersible with a camera on it to risk assess the unknown, so we can actually see, before we go in, what we're up against.
This submersible, known as an ROV, or remotely operated vehicle, is about to explore a structure that's been hidden for 90 years.
And she does it. Mind that. There we are. We're not trying to look for artifacts or anything like that. We're simply looking to gauge the integrity of the structure, how safe it is to go in.
There we go.
Because the water's cloudy, the ROV has been ballasted to float on the surface. But it'll still show Peter and Tony what they need to see.
And the roof for us is the most important piece, because that's the bit that's going to fall on.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about the floor falling on your head. And that's very good at the moment, very good indeed. Better than we could have hoped for, really. And the amazing thing about this is it's not nailed together, it's not screwed together, it's not bolted together. They just fit it in such a way with specially made shoes and things, whereby the geophysical pressure around the gallery just clamps it in place.
Those timbers looking really good nick considering how long they've been down there, don't they?
But it's a little bit like the Mary Rose, is it,
Yeah,
Tony? Is that the...
We'll find the longbows next.
It's got a nautical feel about it.
There's been a lack of oxygen down there, which has aided
Yeah.
the preservation, which...
The preservation, that's astonishing, really, because the corrugated iron is how thick? Fractions of an inch thick. It's amazing condition. Look at the steel beam there. Perfect.
Where are we now, Tone?
Well, I'm guessing we're about 8 or 9 metres into the passage just under Ian's feet. So that's coming out over the other side of the tent. We could be under the side of the tent by now.
Tony, what are you expecting to see at the end?
Based on the drawings I've seen, a lot of them seem to be T-shapes. So I would kind of expect a gallery to come off on both sides at the end of this passage.
It doesn't look like there's anything on the left.
turn it a little to the... No, there's a wall, isn't there?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
So
There's no left turn there.
So there's no left turn.
Is there a right turn?
Yeah, so we've turned right at the end of the gallery. And down there, if we've got infantry accommodation in the gallery we've just been in, will be individual chambers to left and right for the officers.
Have we come to the end here?
Oh, no, there's plenty more to go. Yeah, certainly we haven't seen any individual chambers yet. There's nowhere for the Brigadier General to sleep, and he'd be very, very annoyed if he turned up without a bedroom.
So you've checked the ceiling. What do you do next?
Well, I think that it looks sound enough to enter.
So the team begin to drain the remaining water from the dugout. This is a tense time. For the last 90 years, the water has protected Vampire from the pressure of the clay. Without it, the whole thing could collapse. This is the much vaunted Flanders mud, and you can see that the water is still gathering everywhere on the surface, even though it's been a very dry winter, and as you can see, it's a beautiful day today. And the reason there's so much water about is that 18 feet below here is a great band of solid blue clay that the water can't get through. So, why did the dugout get flooded? Well, if you put a shaft through the clay, then all the water pours straight in, which is why we've got this little homemade pond here where all the water that's being pumped out of the dugout comes in. This isn't excavation at all, really. This is more an exercise in water management. As the water level drops, an anxious Peter descends to the bottom of the shaft, where he's greeted by an uplifting vista.
Behind me, over here, is our first glimpse of the gallery. And it is simply stunning.
The falling water level also reveals another treat. Nestling in the silt at the bottom of the shaft,
It just caught something.
Vampire's first artefacts.
Right, I'm just going to transfer this immediately. 14. Good grief. It's a water bottle. It's really quite nice. And also, this is incredible. This is in roughly the same condition it was dropped 90 years ago. They have date stamp on the bottom of these from 1916. That's how good the condition is. We can read the date on them. But this is a clip of British .303 ammunition and the Lee Enfield rifle that was standard kit at the time.
These finds will be cleaned and analysed later, because now Peter and Johan are about to begin the most exciting and dangerous phase of the excavation. They're going where no human has been for 90 years, inside the Vampire dugout. Midway between the towns of Ypres and Passchendaele in Belgium, a team of historians, archaeologists and engineers are excavating a British World War I underground bunker. They've cleared the main shaft and explored some of the interior with a remote camera.
It's amazing condition. Look at the steel beam there. Perfect.
Now the pumps are draining the last of the water. The team feared this process might cause the whole thing to collapse. but so far it's remained intact.
It looks sound enough to enter.
It's time at last to enter the domain of the 171 tunnellers.
We're now dealing with, I feel, a little bit of the ghosts of the lads that were here. So, a bit of reverence, a bit of delicacy, just take our time and ease our way into it.
What Johan and I will be doing is, for the first time in 90 years, walking down to the end of this gallery and trying to follow the entire system through and try to ascertain how safe we're going to be. Quite a nervous time, this. You can probably hear it in my voice. It's quite a nervous time.
Peter and Johan are taking an enormous risk. Above their heads, millions of tons of blue clay is pressing down on 90-year-old beams.
Right, here we are, the first entry into the past. The key things we're looking for on this trip are bulging timbers, broken steel, any unusual slides of earth. Right. It's actually a stairway. You can feel the concrete floor perfectly solid beneath your feet. Now there's a hazard. We don't want to touch that. That needs propping.
They reach the end of the first passage. Here they'd expected to find a T-junction with two corridors running off it. But just as the ROV suggested, there's only one. And so far, there's no sign of any rooms or living accommodation. They turn the corner.
I've never seen this before.
This feels rather peculiar, turning right and out of sight and sound of everybody, but it is tremendously strong still. You can see there's timber above, and then timber spaces in here as well. Here's the blockage which foiled the ROV. Aha.
Peter and Johan now see what the ROV couldn't. It's not good.
Is that a collapse or is it a slide?
Part of the structure has collapsed, spilling clay into the corridor.
That's the first obstacle we've come across.
But it's a big one. It could prevent the team reaching the rest of the dugout, including, presumably, the missing rooms.
A thrilling but baffling experience is what we just had.
One thing, though, is clear.
It doesn't look anything like that.
While Peter and Johan plan their attack on the collapse, Tony begins the hunt for artefacts in the first section of corridor nearest the shaft.
As we progress, we're clearing the archaeology, so we're sifting the silt and checking for finds and recording their location. It's very unlike my usual form of excavation, which involves a lot of digging into the earth and scraping away. This is a bit more like walking into a building and finding stuff just lying on the floor.
Down here, trowels would be useless, so Tony excavates the finds with a hose. Until a new hazard drives him swiftly to the surface.
All right, sorry, Tony, I'll let me get out of your way.
Fairly fumey down there.
Fumey?
Petrol fumes.
All right.
Out of these cans.
Right.
I can feel it in my stomach.
Let's get...
Which cans?
let's get...
Oil, this oil can, it's just giving off.
Shall we get the ventilation down there?
I think it'll be a good idea.
We need air going in, though, don't we?
It's not a lot.
Yeah.
But they've been using oil cans that have been modified, and they've still got a lot of residue in them.
90-year-old pollution.
Most dugouts were designed with at least 3 entrances, a shaft and 2 staircases. This allowed fresh air to circulate. Because of the fumes, Tony now needs to locate and open up one of those staircases, and so get some fresh air into Vampire.
But yeah, it's just very simple, mundane-looking doorway leading down into these extraordinary sanctuaries.
The search starts at a sinkhole, which appeared when the water was pumped out of the dugout. Almost at once, the machine uncovers a patch of very different coloured soil, which has in it an essential component of bunker construction. Barrels of concrete. Peter's certain this is the top of a staircase. How did you know it was here? There's no evidence of it in the ground, is there?
Quite right, we haven't got any plans, and you have to rely upon the incline sliding. That is the way, and that's what we hope would happen.
But wouldn't you have expected to see shoring here? You're having to put in your own shoring.
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually, because what's happened here is normally the top of the doorway, which you saw in the photograph, is about 1 metre below the surface in this geology. But what we believe's happened is the local people have come back and thought, we'll have that timber for our fireplaces. So they've taken out everything that was safe to take out. They wouldn't go any deeper because it'd collapse on them. And then just filled it up. In fact, they used these barrels. You see these barrels of British cement?
Yeah.
That's wartime cement. And they've just thrown those in to block the entrance up to make it safe. And now Johann's rodding to see whether he can feel the timber. And he's already found 2 steps.
Can you feel something?
Yeah. You hear that?
Oh, yes.
It has a different sound to rock. And, yeah, you can tell wood straight away. There's a little bit of give and that sort of dull thud.
How far down do you reckon the floor of the
Another metre and a
dugout
half to the top of the doorway, so we have about 3.5 metres to go yet. So we've got to shutter all this off to make it safe, but we have to do that by hand now. All the machine will do is take that back, because we will find archaeology in there.
And indeed they do, but of a most unwelcome kind. Is that little not what I think it is?
I suspect it is. These are British shells. They're from an 18-pounder, so there's been a battery somewhere close by with the guns in it, because we can tell from the condition of these that a lot of them are unfired. We can tell that because you've got a drive band around the end there, and that's untouched. So we can tell that these have been unfired rounds that have just been left behind and then dumped in this hole.
The problem is there are more live shells in the clay that's filling the top of the stairway. So although the steps are within touching distance, Tony decides it's too risky to continue.
Tie this up.
I've had Gary start backfilling this because it's just not viable. It's too dangerous, too deep.
So without a staircase, there's still only one entrance to the dugout, which means ventilation will remain a problem. And it's not the only one. Johann is examining the blockage at the far end of the dugout. Hundreds of kilograms of clay have spilled through a weak point in the wall. But through the slump, he and Peter get a tantalising glimpse of what lies beyond.
There's a corridor going on the right side.
Yeah.
Could this corridor lead to the bunker's missing chambers?
We've got 2 weeks left to do this thing now, so we've just got to do whatever we can with what we've got. We've got to make a decision now as to whether we go through that collapse or not, whether it's safe enough to do that. And I don't know. I have to speak to Johann about that.
While Johann figures out how, indeed if, he can break through the slump, I'm keen to see for myself the construction skills of the 171 tunnellers.
The only place that water's getting in now is down the shaft and a little bit coming in down the stairways, but that's the geology again, Tony.
Oh yeah, it still is.
It's welcome
deep,
to Vampire. Welcome.
Okay. Where exactly are we?
Right, if you're coming out of the drips,
Yeah.
I'll show you. We're facing that way. We've just stepped into the dugout. We're just in this gallery here.
Okay.
Just at that point in this gallery, so we're looking down in this direction.
Lead on.
Okay. The first thing I'd like to show you is this. Oh, yeah,
God,
here.
wow. Can I have a look at this? Fantastic. If Tony had continued his excavation of the staircase in the sinkhole, this is where he'd have come out. Who would be coming down here rather than climbing down the way that we came?
This would have been the main entrance, and there's another one identical to this around the corner.
You see, there's still water cascading down there.
Yeah, that's the only way water can get into this dugout, because we're in impervious clay, is either down the incline or down the shaft.
What's this piece of wood, Peter?
That's the frame to one of the most important aspects of this dugout. That's the frame for a gas curtain.
What do you mean by gas curtain?
Well, at the top of every incline, and at the bottom, this is the one at the bottom, you had this sloping frame, and rolled up here would have been a curtain impregnated with a chemical which counteracted gas. And if you had a gas attack, you could form an airlock between the top and the bottom of this stairway simply by pulling a string. The curtain would roll down, seal itself against here.
Poison gas was a constant threat. Gas sentries were on 24-hour duty listening for gas shells.
Gas attack, gentlemen, gas attack. Let's move it now. Let's go. Come on, come on.
Mustard gas was heavier than air, and it would pour down stairways towards the soldiers in the dugout. So the British installed felt curtains to block it. With the curtains down, dugouts offered troops sanctuary, albeit airless and unpleasant, from an excruciating death.
And you can still feel a bit of the material adhering to that piece of wood there.
Oh, right here.
That's right, yeah. That was a lifesaver. Let's have a look down the main
But
gate.
gas wasn't the only threat. Yeah.
They were being shelled with very heavy shells, deliberately searching for these places.
This is one of the few photographs showing the vampire dugout from the air. The dark areas are high-explosive artillery shell holes in the snow.
A heavy, delayed action shell, delayed fuse, it would burrow into the earth and explode at depth. And in fact, while we've been down here, on the road next door, we've had some heavy trucks pass it. And that makes this place quiver just a little bit. And you think, well, perhaps that was a shell bursting nearby might have been like. Veterans sometimes say the candlelight flickers just a little bit as the air moves inside.
Heavy shells could penetrate 30 feet, that's nearly 10 metres, into the Flanders clay. So dugouts were built even deeper. Vampire is 14 metres below the ground. Even then, they had to be strong enough to withstand the blast of shells exploding only a few metres above. So they were built to a rigorous and standardised design out of the strongest materials available: heavy timber and steel. This is a different build, this wall, isn't it?
It is. This is completely different to the incline. Where we've just been is all timber. This, incredibly, is steel. And what they've done here, very straightforwardly, is built a box of steel, solid steel. These are railway lines. These are I-beams here with special shoes to hold them together. There's no nails, no screws, no bolts in this at all. It's all held together by the pressure of the clay, pushing it equally in every direction. Incredible workmanship.
So these dugouts weren't actually just thrown together at all, were they?
By no means. It's like the rest of trench warfare. People think it was a random, sort of messy nonsense.
Yeah.
Absolutely untrue. Every single aspect of this was designed, redesigned, looked at again, improved throughout the war. It just got better and better. Lovely little thing here. This railway line is Mersey steel, 1876. We move 1, 2, 3, 4 along, and here we've got an 1889 Krups. This is a German piece of German railway line. This has either been brought out from England as a German steel rail, or they've dismantled a German railway here, which they've captured, cut it up and used it in the dugout. That's fantastic to find an enemy railway line.
It's funny, you know, when I first came down here, I thought I'd be looking for lots of small artefacts. But really, this is the artefact, isn't it?
Absolutely right. This is what we were looking to study. It's not... We knew we were going to find things inside which would be of interest, but this is the thing. This is... I mean, it's craftsmanship at its very best. And look, it's lasted 90 years. It's incredible, tremendous craftsmanship.
Let's go on a bit. But this craftsmanship isn't unique to dugouts. Before they built Vampire, the tunnellers of 171 had used their skills not to create, but to destroy.
Is that a collapse or is it a slide?
With just a week to go before they have to leave, the vampire team are struggling.
Here is a slide.
Their progress has been blocked by a dangerous slump of clay. To get to the main body of the bunker, they'll have to find a way through. And 90-year-old oil fumes have delayed Tony's excavation of the artefacts littering the floor.
Slip down the stairs.
Shall we get the ventilation down there?
I think that'd be a good idea.
Now, though, the fumes have cleared, and Tony's hard at work.
One of the first things we found, incredible condition, and it's the filter off a pump, off the original pump that was used to keep this place dry. And the other thing I've noticed while I've been exploring around here are these little grooves which are charred. And I'm assuming that these are where candles are. They're on most of the uprights.
Yeah, that's right. There's multiple ones on some, of course, aren't there?
So I'm assuming all the candles that we found floating about in the water at some point must have been attached in some way to the walls.
Yeah. All they did was very straightforward. They got a bit of clay, tons of that about, of course, stuck it on the beam, got a candle, that's an original, and just stuck it on the clay. That's it, instant candle holder.
The finds from the main corridor are added to the ones from the floor of the shaft. The dugout and the men who built it are coming into sharper focus. Alongside the predictable debris of war, some of the tools used by the men of 171.
One of the first things we came across was this short bulldog shovel. And as you can see, it's been cut down. These were made specially for the Royal Engineers to work in confined spaces.
It's about the right size for me, isn't it? What about this shovel?
This is called a grafting tool. And as you can see, it's a different shape, and they both have different jobs. This was specifically designed to cut into the heavy, wet clay. And you'd literally cut it in and prise it out in blocks.
Is that an oil can?
Yeah, lovely, lovely little thing. You can see it's got the maker's mark still on it. Very visible.
Does that say K's patent?
That's right. And if you open it off, you can take a whiff.
Yeah, you can smell the oil, can't you?
First World War oil. Yeah. It's incredible, isn't it? That still work.
What's this big elaborate thing here?
That is a very important object. This is the filter off the original pump that was used to keep the dugout dry. And we've even got the liners, the metal liners from that pipe, which is probably canvas. The soils are so wet here that at times they would have to have men manually operating pumps 24 hours a day. It's a really nasty job, I would imagine.
So is that part of the pump?
I thought it was a lever that you would use to pump the machine, but it's too heavy. What this is from a railway line, and there was a railway running very close by here, and I think it's the lever that you would use to change the points on the tracks. And interestingly, I think the Royal Engineers, the guys building the dugout, have nicked this. They've scavenged it, and they've taken it downstairs because, if you feel it, it's actually a really good weight and would be very useful for driving in heavy timbers. It's like a big maul. So I think they've nicked that and then used it for a different purpose.
Are these bottles British or German?
These are very domestic to us, especially to me, because my hometown's on this one. This is a jar of Baird's pickles from Glasgow. We've also got a bottle of Cambridge relish. I don't know what that's probably some sort of anchovy sauce. And good old traditional HP sauce.
Hooray.
Great with your chips, but anything to give a little flavour to this really boring diet. And you would wash it all down with a drop of the local wine.
This is my favourite find of all. Now, it's fairly obvious that this is a comb. What you may not be able to see is that all the teeth here have been deliberately whittled away. So it's not a comb for your hair, it's a comb for your moustache. A big moustache, I think, an officer's moustache. So where are we now? That's where we came in.
Yep, here's the stairway.
Steps, yeah.
So we've walked through into this wider area.
Yeah.
And that's specifically to take bunks on both sides.
How many bunks?
This would accommodate 16 to 20, 24 men, maybe, along this side and along the other side there.
Hang on, so you've got guys in bunks starting here, going all the way up to there, and all the way back there again.
That's right. 2 bunks high, 1 man on each bunk, and he gets 6 feet of space. And that's your personal space in the dugout.
And this?
Petrol tin, normally used for carrying water. You have to be very careful that you did have water in it, not petrol, if you're making tea. And next to it is the ubiquitous bully beef tin, found everywhere in the salient, in the trenches, in dugouts, everywhere.
Presumably this down here has been left by one of our guys.
No, that's an original.
You're joking.
No, absolutely true. That's it's a cut-down trench wader.
Can I pick it up, or is it...
Yes, you can. No, it's in amazing condition. It's strong.
Well, it's been cut off, hasn't it?
Yep, it was a wader, a trench wader. But very often, because they're unwieldy, they just trim them off and use them as wellies.
You got the other one?
It might be under that mud somewhere. We've got that bit of archaeology to do left in that corner.
The bunks were where the ordinary soldiers could relax together, smoking, chatting, and sharing the contents of packages from home.
You get fresh fruit down here. Tangerines, cakes would have been sent through by parcel. You'd sit on your bunk, receive your parcel through the post office, and share it with your pals.
The ordinary soldiers' bunks were built into the corridor, but officers had their own quarters with separate beds. There were also kitchens, mess halls, communication rooms, everything people needed to survive for long periods underground. But where are these rooms? The only possible answer is beyond the collapse.
Just shine your torch down there. Yeah, you can see the steps there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Where is that going to then?
But the whole area's very unstable. Clay is still seeping through the breach in the dugout walls. Chief Engineer Johan van der Waal has finally made his decision.
The headquarters, small rooms. Never find out now, but we have to stop.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we'll take your word for that.
Yeah.
The risk of further collapse and the lack of ventilation make it too dangerous to go on.
And that's the collapse which has stymied us.
Can we go up that far?
We can go a little bit closer, yeah, but we don't want to get too close, because if you look at the gallery there, can you see on the right-hand side? It's not
yes.
square, it's sort of bulging in a bit, so we can go just a couple of metres.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's wise to go any further.
So, let's have a look. We came in here,
Yeah,
we got up to there, and then turned this corner
That's
here.
it.
And the weak point is...
just that junction a little bit further on, that's it. Just that. Wherever you break away from this structure, that's the weak point. And that has stopped us getting into all this area here with all the separate little rooms.
Okay.
The team pack up and head home. All that is apart from Johan. He's volunteered to have one final go at clearing the collapse. The men who built Vampire were more than just engineers, they were soldiers, and they waged a war of their own below ground. The Underground War began in northern France in December 1914. German engineers built tunnels through no man's land and exploded 10 huge mines under Allied trenches. The impact was devastating.
After the Germans blew their first mine, the British, who were the only people on the battlefield at the time, had to make a response because there was terror up and down the line.
So the tunnelling companies like 171, who had experience underground, were set the task of detecting and destroying the German tunnels.
And they did this by various methods, by putting a biscuit tin full of water in the bottom of a trench and putting an ear in it. And that sort of increased the sounds which were coming from underground.
The technology for listening evolved rapidly. British engineers eventually developed a device called a geophone, which was so sensitive it could detect burrowing earthworms. Once they'd located a target, the tunnellers packed the area with explosive. When detonated, it would kill or entomb anyone inside the enemy tunnel. A new secret war evolved. Now, collapsing a tunnel underground was as important as a battle on the surface.
It was the most secret war, the most barbaric war, the most stressful war on the Western Front. Totally different to what was going on the surface. Men on the surface were not allowed to know what was going on underground.
Soon, the British were laying their own mines under German trenches, with great success. And in 1916, the tunnellers, including the 171, were given their most ambitious mission yet: to detonate a mine so huge it could end the war. Their objective: the German positions overlooking Ypres on the Messines Ridge. As long as the Germans held this high ground, they could repel any Allied infantry attack and dominate the Ypres salient. So the British planned to blow the whole ridge and the Germans on it sky high. The tunnellers worked in total silence and total secrecy.
So it was all kept very, very quiet, very secret, very clandestine, cloak and dagger.
And they began by digging dozens of new tunnels under no man's land towards the Messines Ridge. It would take them more than a year to get there. Ten days after he left the vampire dig, Peter's back.
Yeah, I'm anxious to see this.
And Johann's got some good news for him.
Yes, this is also. So, but this came from the second.
Well, that's excellent. Brilliant, brilliant.
The blockage has gone, simply washed away by a sudden influx of water.
God, you have done some work.
We need it for making a dam.
Yeah.
Johann has spent the last few days reinforcing the damaged area to make it safe.
You've cleared a huge amount. You've done quite a bit of repair. That's superb. Superb.
And now there's a whole new stretch of the dugout to explore.
This is in, I mean, still in very good condition, isn't it? Yeah. So that was completely, when I was last here, that was completely full of earth. Yeah. Because you climbed over there, didn't you? That's astonishing condition.
Beyond the area of the collapse, the passage turns a corner to reveal a second stairway.
Yeah,
About
I
6,
see.
7 meters.
At the top of which, there's yet another corridor which could contain the rooms the team are so desperate to find.
Yeah, I went from the far end to try to rot it, but I have to making a dam on the end.
But in the way is an even bigger collapse.
This is going to take a lot of work to clear, isn't it?
Tony, meanwhile, has got acres of new silt to explore. And almost at once, he uncovers the star find of the dig.
Oh, look at that.
Beautiful. You see the base at the top coming up there?
Oh, yeah.
Oh! This is a trench pump. Quite incredible piece of kit. I'm sure if we stripped it down and gave it a good clean, we could get it to work. In fact, if I have a go, look at that. It's still drawing water. After 90 years in that hole, this thing still works.
Summer 1917. 6 months before they began work on Vampire, the tunnellers of 171 were hard at work on a very different project. They were burrowing under no man's land to plant thousands of tons of explosives beneath German positions on the Messines Ridge. In all, 21 mines were laid deep in tunnels under the tortuous line of German trenches. June the 5th, 1917. The tunnellers celebrate the end of more than a year of hard, deadly work. The last of the explosives has been put in place. June the 7th. After midnight, all dugouts near the Messines Ridge are evacuated. Engineers fear that shock waves from the blast may destroy the underground systems. June the 7th, 3 a.m. Every Allied bunker and tunnel near the front is empty. 3:10 a.m. Using watches that were synchronized the day before, the switches are thrown. Silence. Nothing. Then, a series of earth tremors rumble across no man's land, through tunnels and dugouts, followed by devastation. The explosions killed thousands of Germans in an instant. The blast was heard 200 miles away by Prime Minister David Lloyd George in his study in London. And it scarred the landscape forever.
And in fact, we're standing on a grave.
Well, yeah.
We'll never know how many German soldiers are buried within this crater lip. At Messines, they found that soldiers who were not even near the mine explosions were so mentally shattered by the number and the severity of it that they were incapable of fighting. They were just wandering around, bewildered, not knowing where they were going, what they were doing, couldn't possibly fight.
The Allies captured all German positions on the ridge within a few hours. The tunnellers had succeeded in their most ambitious assignment of the war. But what followed was a disaster. The British failed to exploit the chaos of the Messines explosions. And far from ending the war, the huge assault at the Battle of Passchendaele cost 250,000 Allied lives and advanced the front only a few kilometres. Which brings us back to Vampire, one of 150 dugouts commissioned in the aftermath of the battle, and to the men of 171 who built it. One of the challenges facing the team has been to find out more about the men themselves. This has proved almost impossible. There are no diaries or letters. And this is the only known portrait. A group of nameless faces. But now they've made a breakthrough.
You walk through, Tom.
Team historian Ian McHenry has tracked down the grandson and great-grandson of one of the tunnellers in the photograph. The man's name was Company Sergeant Major Henry Horton. He would have been involved in the Messines Ridge mines, and he probably oversaw the construction of the Vampire dugout.
They'd use anything they possibly could.
Peter has invited Sergeant Major Horton's relatives to Flanders to see their ancestors' work firsthand.
Just the sheer amount of work and the sheer amount of effort to do this is just baffling.
A strange way to spend your war, isn't it? Thinking about subterranean. For your entire war service in the First World War, that's what your grandfather would have done.
Would any of it be made specifically for the dugout?
Everything was, yeah. Everything was made, everything was cut to size off-site, so they didn't have to do any preparation when it got here at all. You use the word privilege.
It is an absolute honour. Absolute honour and a privilege to be here, to be in his footsteps, and to bring his story, you know, to the fore.
Henry Horton was a pre-war regular soldier who came to the front as a Royal Engineer and was among the first men to join the new tunnelling companies. But like so many tunnellers, Sergeant Major Horton kept his war experiences secret.
He didn't talk about the war. I don't remember him talking about the war. My father said he didn't talk about the war, but he was an old soldier who left the army in 1946. So a long career. He always struck me as very workmanlike, very businesslike. I remember him working in his garage on various bits of furniture, and he was always very, very proud of the work that he did. And we've got some items of that furniture at home. So when I went down there, it almost had his name written on it. It's that kind of workmanship. It was the pride in good British engineering. You know, the sapper at his best.
Good down there as well.
And Vampire's got the Horton stamp on it, has it?
It has now.
But so far, only part of Sergeant Major Horton's dugout has been revealed. The rest lies beyond this collapse at the top of the new stairway. Can the team find a way through? With less than a week left, Peter and the team are under pressure. There's still no sign of the main rooms they'd expected to find, and their progress has been blocked by a second collapse. Meanwhile, archaeologist Tony Pollard has been recovering artefacts from the dugout floor.
This is quite unique, Peter. It's a sock.
Bar the odd personal effect, though, he can't find evidence the bunker was ever occupied. There aren't even any bunks for the soldiers to sleep in. Instead, Vampire is full of tools.
A very impressive pickaxe here, which, having cleaned up the head, we know was made in Birmingham. And after cleaning this up, we've found there are a number of markings on it. There's a big number 2 there on the shaft, and then impressed just up at the top of the shaft here, the number 298. Must be some sort of issue number. But then we get on to more specialist stuff, and this thing has puzzled us all day. Well, we reckon it's a maul, some sort of mallet, used in conjunction with this thing. And this is a cast iron shoe, and this is integral, an incredibly important piece of kit. This would sit on the top of the upright girders, which make up the dugout, and in the top bit there would be the parallel that goes across to create the roof beam. And the thing is, because this is made out of cast iron, if you hit it with a metal hammer, it's going to shatter. So we reckon that this might be a specialist sort of mallet to use against cast iron. Some sapper sat down that dugout, has carved that out of a piece of excess timber.
These finds raise an intriguing possibility.
As we've moved further and further into it, it's become quite apparent it's not quite finished. There are tools lying about, there are sheets of corrugated iron ready to go up on the walls and the ceiling, and it's just not quite there.
But why would Horton's men have left Vampire empty and unfinished? The answer, it appears, is that they were caught up in one of the worst disasters of the war. In April of 1918, 4 months after the tunnellers started digging Vampire, the Germans launched a huge counter-offensive. Using new troops released from the Russian front, they recaptured the Messines Ridge. From there, they piled pressure on the British positions at Passchendaele. But instead of fighting, the Allies decided to withdraw to Ypres and give back to the Germans the land that had cost 250,000 lives to take. Land into which they were in the process of digging 150 new dugouts.
Boys, orders from HQ. We're moving out.
Before they'd even finished it, the men of 171 would have been ordered to abandon Vampire to the enemy.
You can't help but empathise, having spent a month now underground working on this thing. You can't help but feel for these guys after all that time, being told by the commanders, we know you've not finished, but we've got to go. The Germans are coming, we're pulling out. What must that have felt like?
Men like Company Sergeant Major Horton would have had to walk away. The war ended just 6 months later. So was that the limit of Vampire's part in it? Or did the enemy, when they retook the area, make use of 171's handiwork?
We've got a German bullet, tantalisingly coming from the bottom of the stairs in the dugout. Been fired, this one. I can even tell from the head stamp on it that it was made in Spandau in Berlin in 1917. But what it's doing there is another question. I suspect it's rolled down the stairs, but even then I think it's been fired from the entrance or close to the entrance. This is a petrol tin, like a jerry can, a square tin, which has been reused, and what they've done is they've simply taken a pickaxe, which we found one, and driven square holes in it. And then what they would do is light a fire inside it, get their billy cans, put them on and brew up. Now, interestingly, this billy can isn't British, this is German.
Ah, so this is evidence of the Germans being here?
The Germans are certainly here, and they've left stuff in the dugout. My quandary is, how did it get there? This was from the bottom of the shaft, so this may have just been dropped in. It's difficult to say. It's like the German bullet. That may have just rolled down the stairs. But even so, it's evidence of Germans in the immediate vicinity and a tantalising suggestion that they may have at least gone into the dugout.
The Germans may briefly have explored Vampire, but the lack of any other finds suggests if they did, they didn't stay long. So just one question now remains. How much of Vampire did 171 complete before they withdrew? The answer lies behind the new blockage at the top of the stairs, if Peter and Johann can find a way through.
I think we all feel that there is something beyond. There should be rooms here. There should be more rooms. All right, here we go. Off you go, Johann.
Yeah.
Good luck.
In the center.
Peter takes a 3-metre-long steel rod and pushes it into the collapse to gauge its extent.
It's a collapse, there's no doubt about that. It looks like the roof has come in, but the rod's going through. We've gone at least 2 metres through it at the top, so it's a fairly wide collapse.
Too wide, in fact, to clear safely in the time they've got available. So reluctantly, Peter and Johann finally decide to call a halt.
This is a long blockage. It would take a great deal of effort and time to get through it. So this probably is the place to end our quest, I think.
For now, at least, Vampire will keep some of its mysteries. But what Peter and the team have revealed is extraordinary. A shaft diving 14 metres through the Flanders mud. At the bottom, a 10-metre passage with a staircase and an area for soldiers' bunks. Round the corner, another corridor, another stairway, and the promise of much more beyond. All of it perfectly preserved.
I think one of the moving things is that it's not the story of the soldiers that lived in it, because they never got to do that. They never got to move into their new house, so to speak. It's the story of the tunnellers, of the Royal Engineers that built this thing. And their legacy in their daily lives is still lying down there.
For the first time, Peter and the team have revealed new information about the unsung heroes of World War I. The 45,000 tunnellers who waged war underground. The men whose bravery and skill provided warmth, shelter and safety for soldiers, and whose deadly subterranean battles prevented German victory. Vampire reveals the world they created underground and offers an insight into what it was like to live in this extraordinary environment. As soon as you get down here, it's incredibly quiet. Really does feel like a safe haven. And I think up till now, I'd always thought it must have been a life of unremitting misery out in the trenches, but now at least I can get some sense that there might have been a few moments of peace in a place like this. And I can imagine the British Tommy, now safe 14 metres below hell, and beginning to relax just a little, sitting on his bunk, wearing his Wellingtons, eating his bully beef and thinking of home.
Time Team's Tony Robinson reckons we should all dig history. Find out why on digital text page 411. Next, vampires versus werewolves. Kate Beckinsale gets caught up in a horrifically gothic underworld.